On Christmas Eve, 2002, a man named Scott Peterson called his mother-in-law with a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He didn't sound panicked. He didn't sound breathless. He simply asked if Laci was there. Laci Peterson was 8 months pregnant, glowing and beloved by her community in Modesto, California. When she vanished that morning, it wasn't just a local missing persons case. It became a national obsession. For over 20 years, the world has been convinced they knew exactly what happened. We saw the cheating husband, the lack of emotion, and the eventual discovery of Laci and her unborn son, Connor, in the chilly waters of the San Francisco Bay. But it's now 2026, and the case that everyone thought was closed has just been cracked wide open by the Los Angeles Innocence Project. New evidence, ignored for 2 decades, suggests that while Scott Peterson was a bad husband, he might not be a murderer. Today we're looking at the evidence the jury never saw, the media circus that demanded a conviction, and the high-stakes DNA testing that could change everything. Was justice served, or did the media build a cage for an innocent man? To understand why this case is so polarizing, we have to go back to that Tuesday morning in December. Scott told police he decided at the last minute to go fishing at the Berkeley Marina, 90 miles away. He left Laci at home, supposedly preparing to walk their golden retriever. When he returned, the house was quiet. The dog was in the backyard, his leash still attached. Laci was gone. In the late 90s and early 2000s, true crime was entering its golden age on cable news. Following the O.J. Simpson trial, the public had developed a taste for the villain. And from day one, Scott Peterson was cast in that role. Detectives immediately noted his behavior. He was helpful but distant. He wasn't screaming from the rooftops. While hundreds of volunteers combed the parks and rivers of Modesto, Scott was often seen standing off to the side, stone-faced. In the eyes of the public, calm was synonymous with guilty. But as any investigator will tell you, grief doesn't have a blueprint. We have to look at the media culture of this era to understand the pressure on the police. Shows like Larry King Live and pundits like Nancy Grace were at their peak. They didn't just report the news, they analyzed every blink of Scott's eyes. This created a feedback loop. The more the media portrayed Scott as a sociopath, the more the police felt they couldn't afford to look at any other suspects. There was a burglary happening directly across the street from the Peterson home on the day Laci went missing. Several witnesses claimed they saw a woman matching Laci's description being forced into a van. But the investigation had tunnel vision. They had their man, and they were going to find the evidence to fit him. Then the floor dropped out from under Scott's defense. If the media had a suspicion before, they had a conviction the moment Amber Frey stepped forward. She was a single mother and a massage therapist who had been dating Scott for weeks. The most damning part: Scott had told Amber he was a widower, weeks before Laci disappeared. He told her he had lost his wife and was spending his first Christmas alone. When the police recorded their phone calls, the world heard a man who was sweet-talking his mistress while his pregnant wife's face was on every milk carton in the country. This was the turning point. It didn't prove Scott was a killer, but it proved he was a liar. And in a high-profile trial, sometimes a lie is just as heavy as a fingerprint. In April 2003, the case shifted from a missing persons search to a double homicide. The remains of Laci and Connor were found on the shores of the San Francisco Bay, the exact area where Scott had gone fishing. The prosecution's argument was simple. Scott drove to the bay, dumped the bodies using homemade concrete anchors, and returned home to play the grieving husband. But the defense pointed out a massive problem. The bodies were found months later, and there was no forensic evidence in Scott's truck or on his boat. No blood, no DNA, no struggle. The trial was a circus. It was moved to Redwood City to try and find an unbiased jury, but it was impossible. People were selling Team Laci t-shirts outside the courthouse. The jury eventually found him guilty and sentenced him to death. This case did something very few cases do. It changed federal law. Because Laci was 8 months pregnant, the prosecution charged Scott with 2 counts of murder. At the time, this was a contentious legal area. The Unborn Victims of Violence Act, also known as Laci and Connor's Law, was passed shortly after. It mandated that if a person kills a pregnant woman, they are legally responsible for 2 lives. It was a massive victory for victims' rights advocates, but it also added an emotional weight to the Peterson trial that made a not guilty verdict almost socially impossible. So, why are we talking about this now? Because the Los Angeles Innocence Project has found something the 2004 jury never saw. A piece of duct tape found on Laci's body was never tested for DNA using modern techniques. Furthermore, new evidence has surfaced regarding the van seen at the burglary across the street. For the first time in 20 years, there is a physical trail that doesn't lead to Scott Peterson. In late 2024 and through 2025, the California courts began a series of hearings that could lead to a retrial. We are seeing a clash between 20-year-old vibes and 2026 science. If that DNA comes back belonging to a known criminal from the Modesto area, it will be the biggest legal upset of the century. The story of Scott and Laci Peterson is a tragedy of 2 lives lost, but it's also a cautionary tale about the power of the media. We want our villains to look like villains, and we want our justice to be swift. But sometimes, in our rush for a guilty verdict, we stop asking the hard questions. What do you think? Was Scott Peterson a cold-blooded killer who almost got away with it? Or was he a deeply flawed man who was in the wrong place at the wrong time? If you want to stay updated on the DNA results and the potential retrial in 2026, make sure to like this video and subscribe. It really helps a new channel like this grow. And tell me in the comments, do you think someone can be convicted purely on demeanor? Let's talk about it.